Hey, what's going on, everybody? How you guys doing? Welcome back to Podio Commentary. My name is Matt Jarbo. Today, we're going to be talking about Backrooms, the new film from 20-year-old film director Kane Parsons, a kid who cut his teeth in the dirty streets of creepypasta YouTube by really creating what could only really be seen as like the quintessential version of Backrooms, right? This is a creepypasta. As far as I know, it's in the public domain. As far as I know, anyone can mess around with it. And we are probably, based upon the success of this movie, going to see a lot of copycats and a lot of people attempting what is known as liminal horror storytelling. And I think we're going to get a lot of that, which should be really fascinating as time goes on, because this movie was quite good. I have very few notes to say about it up until what I can only describe as the utter fuck you ending, which I'm going to complain about when we get to that point. But in the meantime, Kane Parsons was 16 years old, approached by James Wan. James Wan thought he was a much older filmmaker. James Wan has even said that in their first meeting. Kane Parsons' father came along, right? Kane Parsons had the option of shooting this movie in between his junior year and senior year of high school. In fact, when it was first announced, that was basically what was going to happen. Then they decided to push it back till after he graduated high school, to which case he had a choice to make. Do I go off and make a $10 million movie that is produced by James Wan and Sean Levy over there at A24? Or do I go to college? Considering that his movie has already grossed, a lot more than its budget, I would argue he probably made the right call, right? And that's not a condemnation of the current state of the collegiate enterprises in this country. Well, maybe it actually should be. Don't send your kids to college, people. Get them a skill. And Kane Parsons really did develop a skill. Now, as far as I know, he didn't write the movie. I forget the name of the writer. I'm sure he had input on it. But how do you take a story about a creepypasta, about an infinite space of just yellow carpet, yellow wallpaper, and yellow lights, and turn it into a feature-length film that will not only be enticing for the audience, but will be accessible to those who do not follow what is the lore, if you will, of the Backrooms. And that is something that Kane Parsons really, really, really had to navigate here. Now, he has said that this movie is not dependent on, like, you can understand it without knowing all the lore, which is good. But at the same time, given where they end this movie, I really feel like that's a mistake. And I say that because everything else is really, really, really good. Okay, like everything else is really, really good. Chiwetel Ejiofor is in it as Clark. He is a businessman. He runs a furniture store. He's an architect at heart, but he got stuck running this kind of really crappy store that he clearly hates. He's an alcoholic because he hates his life. It ends up getting him kicked out of his house by his wife, whom he is paying for her college to go be a lawyer and everything else, and he resents her for it. And there's a lot of that midlife frustration that was on display here, which is really interesting, that midlife frustration was so aptly captured by a 20-year-old. Right? A kid at the beginning of his life can understand like the midlife crisis better than I think a lot of adults can. And I actually think that has a lot to do with one of the reasons why this particular story, this particular movie is doing as well as it is. And it has a lot to do with the fact that, a lot of the struggles that someone in their midlife might have had 20 years ago, kids are facing those same kind of things now. Right. And so there's a lot of things that are happening with Gen Z, with, economics and jobs and home and everything else. Right. And this movie kind of captures, not directly, but I would say in some ways indirectly, the frustration. And Chiwetel Ejiofor, my God, he gives a really, really, really good performance here. Like you want to spend more time with this guy. I actually really did. Because it's not that I wanted to see that he had some kind of like descent into madness. What I wanted him to find was reason to live. I wanted him to find a reason to overcome his problems. And I feel like that was something that, well, unfortunately didn't really happen, because on the other side of this coin, you've got Mary. And Mary is a psychiatrist. She's, in fact, she's Clark's therapist. She's got demons of her own. We get flashes of this at points of the movie of her, and I can only assume is her mother. Although I don't know if I'm wrong. I haven't looked it up, but it looks like it's, I don't know. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a male or female actor, trans or not. I don't know, right? There's moments where it's hard to kind of tell. But that person clearly is having mental illness issues. And that is something that deeply impacted Mary throughout the course of her life, right? She wants to help people probably because she can't help her mother. And over the course of her trying to help Clark, Clark becomes more unhinged only because he is dealing with this situation of uncovering the Backrooms, right? This seemingly infinite copy of a copy of a copy of our world, kind of, maybe. But there are other people that are there. He finds security cameras. He finds some weird caveman-looking guy that is sending out different messages in different languages, which is actually something that I think the Voyager spacecraft actually has on there as well. Something written in a bunch of different languages, just on the offset chance that if some kind of sentient life form finds it, like they could recognize it or piece it together. I'm not too sure if that has anything to do with it, but that's kind of where my mind thought as I was listening to this. But I think at the same time, whoever is back there is also trying to see if there's anyone else that's going to be there as well, considering that we find out at the end that whatever this thing is popping up new doors all over the place, and they can't really seem to contain it. Although it does also feel like this thing is not necessarily trying to be contained as much as it's just kind of creating these odd copies of what's back there. And this is where things get interesting, right? Because the movie is shot narratively. And I do also want to say the cinematography is really good. I really like how they shot the characters a little bit further back from camera to make it feel smaller, to make it feel more liminal, right? There's a little off center. It feels a bit unsettling to look at. But again, you're compelled enough by the mystery that you want to see where things go. And so when Clark goes to his assistant manager and her boyfriend to get the video camera to go down in there, and about, 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so of the movie ends up becoming a point of view found footage, I thought that was really compelling. In fact, I actually was a little bummed when we went back to the traditional narrative structure of storytelling, because for me, the point of view found footage was far more visceral, far more engaging, and it's when the movie had a real sense of danger surrounding it, because you were in it, right? You were very much just, lockstep in line with what these characters are seeing and what they're experiencing versus the more detached third-person perspective, which makes up the first and third acts of the film. So I feel like in many ways that would have been the better course. If I would have made this movie, I would have gone point of view found footage all the way through. But, I didn't make it. And again, what we got that was on the narrative side of it, right, I thought was really good as well. The third person stuff I thought was very well done, very well acted all the way through. And you find these characters to be compelling enough to want to spend more time with them, especially as they are uncovering whatever the hell the Backrooms is. Now, I also want to say that the sound design and the music are doing a lot of heavy lifting for a lot of this movie. Because if it didn't have the same kind of score and sound design, I think a lot of it would fall kind of flat, because there's a lot of moments of just no dialogue, of just walking slowly through an ominous hallway, not knowing if anything is going to come around the corner, not knowing if anything is going to, grab you and drag you deeper into the void. You don't know any of that. And so it works really well for just keeping you engaged. And I think whoever did that did a fantastic job. But anyway, going back into the whole thing with the first person stuff, because I think this is when we get the most amount of lore expansion on the story. They're taking it through the back room. They're taking it through everything. They end up lowering the one boyfriend down into another room, which is where whatever creature is down there is doing. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is he finds a shirt that says "End Apartheid." Now, they don't say what year this movie is set, but given the TV, the lack of internet, the lack of cell phones, I'm going to say early 90s, especially if they're having the end apartheid t-shirts. That would be the stuff coming out of like South Africa. And, looking that it was a bunch of t-shirts, one of the things that I do recall from like retail is that, a lot of the shirts that don't get sold here in the States end up going to like Africa and South Africa and stuff, other parts like third, world countries. So I kind of wonder how much of that ties into that. I don't even know if it does, if I'm just overthinking it. But there's questions that are asked that we obviously don't get answers to yet. And that's okay, because I thought it was compelling. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was like, okay, here we go. This is good. But then, we get this creature. He kills the boyfriend. That scene was pretty cool. And then we follow Clark with the camera, and Clark ends up going to a room where apparently there's a window on the other side that the assistant manager was able to see him through. And then, he's not able to get to her, and then someone grabs a camera, and then at that point, that's about an hour into the movie, we then flip characters. We switch perspectives. We now go to Mary. This I did not care for. Not saying that it's bad. Okay. But when you spend half the movie with one character and his struggles and his trials and his tribulations, and you become emotionally invested into that character because of the background of that character that we have been able to learn more so than Mary, now all of a sudden we're in Mary's shoes, seeing things from her perspective, which makes sense given Clark's heel turn and how he becomes kind of crazy, considering that he's been down there for a while, although we have no idea how long he's been down there. I think it's longer in the back room for him than it is on the outside, if that makes any sense, right? Time stretches slower when he's in there versus how it is in our world. And then the two of them talk. He ends up convincing her. She convinces him to let her go. She says, just stay down here. I can't help you. And this is where we get this moment of these two characters more or less kind of reaching the end of their arc, right? Very odd with that, the way that it's done. Not terrible, but just odd. They have a conversation and he's like, I don't want to change. And she's like, okay, don't. And he's like, well, I want to stay here. And she's like, okay, stay here. And he's like, okay. Yeah, okay, cool. You can go. Thank you. Right. And then she's like, I can't save anybody. I'm a terrible therapist. That's her arc. Literally. Her arc is realizing she can't save anyone. Right. But it's not really even about saving anyone. At that point, it would be about saving herself. Right. And then she ends up encountering the weird 9-foot tall Captain Clark, monster that kills Clark and then chases her. That scene's really cool, by the way. That scene's really cool. I thought that was great. It was well done, well crafted. That was the use of the budget right there. And then she ends up, basically getting gassed and knocked out and then taken hostage, if you will, captive by a company called Async, which creates MRI machines, that does scans of the brain, right? And this is something that's kind of doing scans of our world. That's kind of the whole point of it. And then at the very end of the movie, this is literally the end of the movie, she's talking with Mark Duplass, who we only know his name is Phil, and he works for Async, and his job is to explore the Backrooms. Well, by the way, they never call it Backrooms at all, just as a point out. And then she's like, well, what's going to happen to me? And then like the movie's over. It shows a whole bunch of other scenes that are other places that have been created, right? The missing posters of the assistant manager and her boyfriend, the torn down house that Mary grew up in. I mean, there's elements here that are definitely like metaphoric, right? They're analogous. They're for their themes. I get all that. But I'm also at the point now, and maybe this is just, and as I mentioned earlier with Kane Parsons being Gen Z and being able to kind of capture the midlife crisis quite well because of what elements of that would reflect upon Gen Z. And like, I'm looking at that going like, I'm so tired of horror being a metaphor for trauma. I mean, yeah, it is, sure, but it's also like, come on, we can try a little bit harder. We can try a little bit more. We can do a little bit better. And that's my biggest problem with Backrooms when we get to like the final couple minutes of the movie is you've got this great trajectory, this interesting mystery, compelling enough characters. You want to see what happens, even with the narrative shift of the perspective. Still it's interesting, it's compelling. You want to see Mary survive. You want to see Mary get out of there. You want to see all these things, and then it just ends. And I saw initially said as it didn't stick the landing. It's not, this isn't even an issue of sticking the landing. This is an issue of just saying, fuck the landing. Let's crash the plane. Right. This is such a cock tease ending. It really is. It's like, well, where am I? What is this place? What's going on? And then like no answers of any kind. Now, obviously, a $10 million movie now having made $80 million in its opening weekend, more than that actually, is the likelihood of them greenlighting Backrooms Part 2, like something that's going to happen right away? The answer to that is obviously yes. Okay. Is there more lore that you can learn by watching Kane Parsons' YouTube? The answer is actually, from what I've been told, yes. So I need to do that to understand more about async, to understand more about the Backrooms and everything else. But again, as far as just the normal audience is concerned, I'm not against homework. I'm not against learning more about what's going on to have a better understanding. In fact, I love that kind of stuff, and I think they should lean into it. But nothing with the marketing, nothing with the promotion of the movie actually pushed that forward. And so if it's something that's not even part of the marketing that I should be knowledgeable of, then I think that they're doing me a disservice as an audience member. And I think that's one of the reasons why I call it a fuck you ending. Because at the end of the movie, you're just kind of sitting there going like, that's it? That's all you got? Look, I was talking with a friend of mine and he had brought up The Matrix. And I was like, okay, fine. Well, at the end of The Matrix, yes, Neo becomes the one. And we know that's going to carry on past that, but he destroys Agent Smith, and that, of course, is the conclusion of that chapter of the story. We get our beginning, our middle, and our end. Now, here we get the beginning, the middle, and like 95% of an ending. There's no ending. It just ends. That's not an ending. I don't like ambiguous endings. I'm sorry. I think it's lazy. I think it's crap storytelling. I think it's one of those things where you don't want to commit to something because you don't know what will happen. And I really hate that in movies and stories. I don't need ambiguous endings. I'm not trying to do an unsolved mystery. If it's an unsolved mystery, it's unsolved in the premise. We already know what we're getting. So we know that we're not going to get a conclusion. We're not going to get a climax or a release. This is what I'm talking about, is like the fact that they do that here, I think does a disservice. And also the B- cinema score, which is not a good cinema score, is another reason why. Now, again, that is the only negative I can think of in the movie. Like legit. It's the only negative I can think of in the movie. And it leaves me wanting more, which is, again, obviously what they want. But I'm just like, that's what bugged me about it. Everything else is great. like really, really, really good. No, I want them to do a sequel like right away. But that part of it is what gets me. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Backrooms. What are yours? Let me know down in the comment section. If you guys haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you for listening to Podio Commentary. Have yourself a great day and peace out.